When you get a call of somebody who is driving erratically or endangering someone or for whatever reason in a vehicle, what are the first things that you do? And what is the protocol that your officers go through in cases like that?
It's a standard response to any potential crime in progress. Our officers respond to it, attempt to engage themselves, and then when I get engaged, either engage the individual, whether they be on foot or in a vehicle, it matters not, and try to determine if in fact there's a danger to the public, a danger to the individuals being called in, or if in fact there's a crime being committed.
Now, when they first encounter an individual, what do they try to do?
Try to gain compliance and understand what's going on. We got way ahead of the curve on educating our officers on deconfliction, on the ability to use time, space, and commands to try to de-escalate a situation. Right now, we're at about 80% of our officers have been trained in advanced confrontation management, critical incident training, if you will. It's a 40-hour course, so it's not inexpensive to send an officer to this course because we have to rearrange his schedule, we have to get him off staff, I mean somebody has to backfill for him. So we've got approximately 80% of our officers trained in this advanced confrontation management long before the Department of Justice recognized as something needed done, long before the PERF board, if you will, the Professional Executive Law Enforcement Boards recommended this. We were way ahead of this. We were also way ahead of the curve on control devices for people who are erratic and out of control. We deployed taser devices, electronic control devices, if you will, to every one of our officers. A lot of departments would pick select officers and hand them off to them. It's been over 4 years ago, we saw the value in electronic control devices, and we issued them individually to every one of our officers to augment their pepper spray that we also use and to augment the other defensive tactics. So we were way ahead of the curve on these things, preparing for these incidents because we saw it coming. Another thing we did, and I'm going to bifurcate off here a little bit, is we saw the coming of the rise of incidents involving people with mental health crisis. We carved out over a year ago out of our budget enough money to support 2 officers and 1 sergeant, sent them to advanced training and how to deal with people with mental illness, how to engage those people. Part of their job also is this team goes in the field and they respond to mental health calls. Not only is a mental health call happens, but they do so in a proactive manner. We have a reasonably good list of individuals who are chronically address mental health issues and just continuously. So what this team does is goes out and contacts them on a regular basis and asks, do you have your medication? How are you feeling today? Do you need a ride over to Choose County Behavioral Health to talk to somebody? Are you taking care of yourself? And they've actually got to the point now where we've established partnerships with our partners in the community to help them. Are you on the Oregon Health Plan for you can get medical treatment and get your medication you need? And we help facilitate those kind of things. Because quite frankly, we have seen a doubling of our mental health calls in 3 years. This last year they went up 35% over last year. And last year was the highest we'd ever seen. So we're responding to about 1,600 to 1,700 mental health calls per year.
Yeah. I heard 3 to 5 a day almost.
Well, 16, I think it's, 1,680, I think so. I just divided by 365.
Do the math.
Yeah.
Do the math. In these cases where you are training, and 80% of the force is trained, as you mentioned, can you do more? Can there be more that could be accomplished?
We are way ahead of the curve on that. We have stretched our budget as far as we can and redirected as much money as we can towards proactiveness in this area. Other things that we have done is to augment our electronic control devices, augment providing the officers with advanced training on how to engage verbally and physically with these people. We've also brought a couple of pieces of equipment out that I didn't mention. One of them is called the WRAP. It's WRAP. You can look at it online. It's a control blanket, if you will, that cinches a person's legs and enables us to put them in a position so they don't have to worry about positional asphyxia. And it gives us the ability to control them without them hurting themselves or others. It wraps around their legs. The other thing we did, which is a bit contrary to some of the recommendations that you're hearing, but hear me through on this, we deploy 40mm grenade launchers. And this is nothing just BEMPD does. This is very standard throughout the U.S., but we adapted, we immediately jumped on that early. And we have enough of those out that there's always one on the road. Now this, you hear grenade launchers, you think military weapons. We need to demilitarize is the chant you hear quite often. But what these 40 millimeter grenade launchers do is they allow us to shoot a 40 millimeter ball, which is about the size of a golf ball. And it's a rubberized ball, it's a soft foam rubber ball. And allows us to hit individuals 25 to 30 feet away, which may be holding a knife, which may be holding a baseball bat. It gives us one more tool that we potentially can deploy.
Without lethal means.
Yes, well, they're less lethal. There's just about anything you have can be lethal in any case, but they are considered less lethal. And they're significantly less lethal than a 9mm round or a 223 round of a rifle. And so we have those out in our vehicles, and our vehicles are clearly marked. You may see one of our vehicles go by. Look at our ATVs. You may see a 40 on the back of it and a large W. They're magnetic, and we make sure every vehicle is equipped with those. For our officers, no, I can go get one. I can get either 40 millimeter Nerf ball shooting round gun out of there, or I can get a wrap to help with these things. Those are the things we've done to try to take the violence out of dealing with people who are violent. But it doesn't work 100% of the time. It just doesn't.
Now, the two officers that were involved, it was confirmed that they have been through the training. They've received the training. My question would be, when a police officer comes up to a car, the space and the time elements really aren't there that you instruct and train your officers to be aware of. It's very hard. You have to be up to the window to be able to talk to the individual. At that point, what is going through an officer's mind? What's happening then?
Having spent a few years on patrol myself, coming up through the ranks, I can tell you an officer's perception has changed today than it was 10 years ago. If you look at the number of officers which were killed in ambush this last year, it went up 76%, purposely ambushed and murdered. When you look at the assault on officers, it's also. So our officers have a new understanding of what's going on, or at least the dynamics of the world they operate in are changing. We are seeing people more willing to aggressively come at officers that aren't engaged in the actual contact they may have with an individual we want to arrest or an individual we're having a enforcement stop with. We're seeing people more willing to come off the sidewalk and move towards us with a camera up and invade us what we know is a safe zone for an officer to operate in. So the officers today face a very dynamic environment, a very threatening environment at times. When they're out trying to practice what we as citizens ask them to do, we ask them to go forth and protect us. We ask them to go out and also be kind as you do it. Also be thoughtful as you do it. Also take consideration not what you're thinking, but what the possible situation of that person is. And can you imagine putting yourself in that dynamic, walking into the other room, not knowing who these people are in the room, and all of a sudden one of them jumps out? It's an assessment we ask. I'm getting around to what you're talking about. One thing that's quite often lost or not acknowledged in these conversations is there's only one career field in the United States that's asked or told or asked to swear to, willing to go out into the public, and we tell them and we ask them to swear to it that they will use lethal force to defend themselves or others. No other career, nobody says it in their job descriptions. And so with that, we have to remember we're asking these folks to go out into the dark and to do these things. Now, granted, there's limits on all this, and we're a constitutionally based police force, which means our practices adhere to the Constitution for a search and seizure as far as all the constitutional rights. So we have to step back, and the Supreme Court has told us this. You need to step back and look at the totality of the situation. What did the officer reasonably know at that time? So one of the challenges we run into with these use of force situations, I'm not going to speak directly to the one presently, what we run into is people want to take, if it's a video, let's say we have a video of it, and let's imagine it's our old 16 millimeter, they want to take one slice, one frame, and look at that and define the entire interaction. They want to say, why couldn't the officer have just possibly shot the gun out of his hand? Why couldn't the officer have used some kind of karate move, when in fact that's not the totality of the situation with a conflict. It just isn't. Having been in many of those throughout my career, having someone got an advantage of me and got a gun on me and held me at gunpoint for a while, I know how this works. Having experienced police shootings personally, I know how this works. And the dynamics of these situations are so quick that a person, no matter how well you train them, is going to drop back to what their basic Maslow theory is, and that first bottom rung of Maslow's theory is to take care of themselves first.
It's a natural instinct.
Yeah, and you know, an example I think you can see is, you know, when SEAL Team 6 deployed after Osama bin Laden, they are, I think arguably, they're probably the highest trained unit in the world. I think arguably they are. I don't believe anybody can believe the minute they jumped off that helicopter, their intent was to go up and shoot his wife. I don't think that was their intent. I think when you look at the dynamics of the situation, they shot a female that was unarmed because of the dynamic situation. You have to look at the entire thing that they're operating on. And when we ask officers today, we're asking a lot of officers, and at some point we are actually assessing them at an unreachable standard. And when we talk about cameras and videos, they capture things that quite often the brain does not capture when the brain goes into, as you say, protection mode. So when an officer approaches the door of a vehicle, the first thing he's assessing is, what is the threat surrounding him as he approaches outside of the vehicle? Is there a threat within the vehicle? And what is the conduct of that individual? What are you stopping them for, their conduct? Then, what is the conduct of the individual behind the wheel? We deal with so many people that are under the influence of narcotics or under mental health issues. They're so erratic quite often that the officer has to do an immediate assessment of that. Quite often they'll step back and call for cover, call for a second unit. Quite often they don't have an opportunity to call because the individual takes the issue to the officer.
It's almost harder to deal with somebody who is on medication or having a mental lapse than it is an ordinary criminal.
It is, and you're one step ahead. First, you got to diagnose that. Are they criminal in behavior, or are they mental health in behavior, or is there an overlap, which we can often see? Are they on drugs? Is their behavior being caused by the drugs, or is it because of criminal behavior? Period, and they want to escape, and then you have to assess that just in a few seconds at the door, no matter even if you back out. You know, one of the things we're experiencing here in Oregon, you know, it's easy for people to say is, yeah, but all that violence is happening in the South. It's happening in Dallas. It's happening in Houston. It's happening on the East Coast. We have to remember, in this last year in Oregon, we lost one sergeant at Seaside. Casey.
We're doing an interview in here, please. You can just leave
Can
it
I just
out.
leave them here
Yep,
then?
yep.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a young sergeant shot in Seaside chasing an offender down there. We had an officer ambushed in Clackamas County. We had another officer, state trooper, shot and fought for his life. So it's not a East Coast thing. It's not a South thing. It's happening throughout our profession. So these officers are aware of this. It's very heightened in their perception of this. We train on this. They're aware of all these things happening. So when they approach, they're trying to assess outside, inside. What's going on inside that car? Why is he behaving like that? Why is he reaching when I'm telling him to keep his hands where they belong? When you have a chance, go to a website called Force Science. They're controversial from some. Others see absolute foundations in their research. Force Science did a lot of research on action versus reaction, and it's valid. I mean, you can watch it. You can see how quickly a person can reach for a handgun, fire, run, fire before the officer has a chance. They tell us that action always overcomes reaction.
Yeah, proactive rather than...
Yeah, because it takes you a half a second to process what is he doing, another half a second to react to it.
Well, and in these cases, you're being asked to determine if it's a criminal act or if the person is having a mental challenge. And that's what the training helps to do. But how do you do that in a half second?
That's exactly my point, and we're trying to hold officers to that. That's one of the challenges we have. We're trying to hold them to that. You know, and officers know, they're very much aware of the fact someone can get the drop on them very quickly. So when someone turns and goes into a shooting stance with a cell phone in their hand, in the dark, is that a cell phone or is that a firearm? I know a cop got shot and murdered in an alley in Seaside this year. I know another one got ambushed. And just outside Sherwood, I know another one was ambushed in Clackamas County. I really want to go home and see my children and wife. It's not being cowardice. It's the reality of the environment these officers have to work in today.
We talked a little bit about visual aid and so forth, and you have directed the staff to reassess cameras, individualized cameras, I believe.
That's, there was some misquoting went on there. I'm not going to come
Okay.
to that.
All right.
We have never stopped assessing that. We initially looked at it. We budgeted in 2013. I was in charge of that project. We actually set aside money to move forward with that project. We had the money set aside. We carved out $42,000 to buy the equipment. Then an interesting thing happened is as we're assessing which camera worked well, which software system, which platform do we store the videos on, our legislature met and set in an entire set of rules which governed how cameras would be used and how they'd be rolled out and how the material would be released.
Mm-hmm.
And it literally quadrupled the price of what we were going to have to do. And it also put us in a situation where we were going to have to find the money to actually hire 1 to 1.5 staff just to manage the project. Now, there could be a good argument made is it's money well spent. That argument be made. And I'm not going to say that isn't a good argument. What we've been doing is monitoring since 2014, since the legislation came out. We have been monitoring the cost of the software, the cost of the actual equipment, the cameras, and the downloading stations, and we've seen them dropping slowly. We're seeing software come out. Are you familiar with this Senate bill on body
Yes,
cameras
I am.
about the required for blurring out of faces?
Right.
Well, there's a step that they don't talk about in that that's covered federally: the redaction of personal information.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking to somebody and you ask them their phone number and these things, you have to take that out.
Right.
And that's manual.
You have to edit that out.
Yeah, so that's where the extra bodies come to this. And our experience in the Portland area and other areas where this has been mandatory, they've seen a huge uptick in the number of requests for these films, body cameras. Seattle the problem. So that's where we need the extra person to manage that.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did was we've been watching this. We've been watching the cost come down of cameras, and you have either an on-body camera or an in-vehicle camera. We've been watching both. We've been watching the price of software come down, and actually the storage costs are coming down. And it's into June, beginning of July, we went back and we refreshed our proposal for those things. And we saw that we still did not have the ability. It was going to be around $250,000 for the project. We saw we did not have that. So we said, let's hold that. Let's wait till the upcoming budget building's coming on and see if we have the ability to plug that into it. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the shooting reassessment. Okay. We've been assessing this all along. We've just been watching the market to see what's going on with it.
Would it be a fair statement that it's probably just a matter of time?
It is. It is. I would agree that that's a fair statement. All we have to do is be able to find the funding and the staff and the funding to support the staff and to support the project.
It could also be a good visual tool for training, I would think.
There's some funny legislation out in places where you're not allowed to use that for training in different states, and I'm not sure where we'll come on that. And it comes from officers do not want to be embarrassed. Now, there's a fine line between
maybe you could black out the officer.
yeah, learning lesson and embarrassment. I agree that there, but you're right. There's great opportunity for that also. I can see the absolute need in places which have been found to be departments that have been found to be operating outside the constitutional boundaries. I can see an absolute need tomorrow to find the money and roll that out. We have a very strong history of NPD of not being that department. And a recent article or KTVZ talked about the number of shootings of police officers have been involved in 25 years. They're low. They truly, truly are. Mm-hmm. And when you compare them to we have about 86 to 87,000 contacts per year. We make about 4,000 arrests per year. And our use of force we've taken our use of force and almost cut it in half over the past 3 years with the use of advanced equipment, with the use of training, and a change of philosophy. And so when you compare those to the amount of people we contact, the amount of people we place under arrest, it's so minuscule low that we really do not, I do not believe that we have a great challenge with adhering to the civil rights and within the policy and procedures and best practices of police departments. Mm-hmm. So I don't see, there's not an urgency right now to get the cameras out there. Now some folks will say, well, maybe you should have in this shooting, for instance, like this one. Quite frankly, when you look at camera footage that's released out on the internet, the officers involved in the actual shootings and wearing body cameras, the footage is not that defining. It just isn't. You get some good audio out of it, but it's just not founding just because of the way it's placed on the body and the way you have to place it on the body. So we don't see that urgency right now, but we are progressing that way. And as you say, it's just a matter of time.
When something does go wrong and there is a lethal action, it's got to hurt you as well. You have to take that really personally, don't you?
Well, first off, I'm not going to say things went wrong, because sometimes lethal actions, things go right.
Sure. Good point.
It's funny. I'm wired that way. I worry about people. I worry about things, but I'm not the only one. We have a strong philosophy in our culture in our department is we use the minimum amount of force possible. We always do. There literally, I can state unequivocally, there's not an officer in my department that I have a concern about that. We've done a good job of hiring. A few years ago, we saw the challenge coming. We were feeling the challenge of hiring people to come into our profession. We've been operating with about six open vacancies in the last 2.5 years because we cannot find people that meet, number one, the quality of the MPD, because we're very, very, we have a very high standard for hiring, and for those people who can make it through our training sessions. And quite frankly, being a police officer is just not as glamorous as it once was because of the critics, the people with a cell phone in your face. And the other part of it is that people don't like to talk about, but if you read the bulletin lately, you'll see it. Our retirement programs are going down to nothing more than a standard 401k. Interesting is a Pew. I just read a major study on it. It was from one of the major think tanks. They predicted this 5 years ago that we were going to have a hiring issue, getting people coming to law enforcement. I was amazed by that, and I'll get back to you with that study, and I'll send that to you.
Future Able Trust, maybe.
Yeah, they reached out in the future, and one of the things they identified is when they continue to decrease the benefits in retirement, you're going to have less people coming into the career field. And I don't think they could have anticipated the problems we had in Ferguson and those things. I know they didn't even mention those things, but those have really amplified that issue. So when we talk about hiring and culture and use of force and me taking this personal, the part I take personal is it's hard on everybody. It's hard on the citizens that we defend and protect. It's hard on the officers within because right now in today's culture, they're not sure who's going to protect them and who's going to defend them. When they're actually out there trying to do the best they can, and they're limited by the human factor. So it is, and you don't become a chief of police by being adverse to the feelings of your department and the men and women who serve for you. I've got really good men and women serving for me.
Without being specific, what can you say about the two officers who were involved in this latest incident?
I can tell you they're phenomenal officers. The one is a 15-year veteran with us. I've known him all those 15 years and worked with him. He is extremely enlightened individual, very introspective individual, the kind of officer who I want working my block, walking my streets. Very good cop, very good decision maker. The second officer is he's a lateral hire from Las Vegas Police Department, came to us with a lot of experience. Well-trained officer. He's also accepted and indoctrinated himself into our philosophy, which is much different than Las Vegas Metro, about the basis of community service, of serving the community, service above self. And they're both very experienced. They have a history of very good decision making. And and the thing that sometimes gets lost in this message is they're both citizens of Bend. They're both really good fathers. They're both really good husbands. These are normal people we're asking to do an extraordinary job, and they do it well.
Sometimes things don't work out the way it should.
And the funny part is the cops have only got control of about half of what happens. We hear so much about rights. And with rights comes responsibilities. And at some point, and I understand, if a person is in a mental health crisis, maybe they can't exert the control and responsibility they should. But quite frankly, in any interaction, there's two people involved. And the police cannot control the entire interaction. We would like to believe we can. We train to try to, but there's just so many variables that we cannot control every interaction. And hence, the police are often required to do some things that they would not want to do normally, or they they would not want to have to do. And one of those is use of deadly force. No cop ever shows up in the morning and says, I just can't wait to get in a deadly force encounter. Because I'll tell you, whatever police officer knows, whatever police officer has been trained from day one, whatever attorney for Police Officers Association tell them is, the first thing that's going to happen is your entire life's going to be turned upside down. The second thing is, your entire life's going to be going over with a microscope. Something you may have said 10 years ago to a friend in jest is all of a sudden going to be a fact of who you are. What they're going to know is they're at great financial risk personally. They know that. What they know is their life and profession has been interrupted, and their course of their careers is all of a sudden going to come to a stop. What they also know is they're going to suffer a degree of mental intrusion. And I'm not saying it's probably right, but they know that this is going to affect them. They know the cycle. They're trained, and we train them in advance. Be aware. This is what's going to happen to you after a shooting. You're going to be taken aside and taken away from your peers. We're going to assign one peer to be with you. He's going to stay with you through this. Do not talk to him, because anything you say to him can very well be used in court. During this time, we're going to take your gun from you, but we're going to replace it with another gun. We're going to ask you to tell us briefly. We're going to order you briefly to tell us what happened out there. We're then going to send you back, and we're going to offer you a psychologist, and we're going to send you home on administrative leave. None of that is conducive to a good feeling. You know, and there's been much talk around the U.S., and actually the Department of Justice, it's one of their findings, or one of their beliefs, is that we need to immediately release the officers' names. The second belief is we allow officers to do the best practice and research to have 48 hours to 72 hours decompress after a shooting, then provide us with a statement. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when you hear these things talked about and spoken of, it's a very microscopic view of the situation. And quite frankly, I find it disingenuous to only focus on those two without providing what I'm about to provide you. There's very few jobs in America where I walk up and I order you, tell me what just happened there. And that's what we do with officers. At the scene of a shooting, they have to give what's called a public safety statement. They have to tell us which direction they shot, who they shot, is there any weapons unsecured, and briefly what happened. And then they're released. Then they're allowed to decompress for 48 hours and come back and give a statement. What is lost in this, quite often in this argument, or people who will stand up and rally against officers having this decompression time, is the fact that even though you're a police officer, you're still a citizen of the United States. You still have your Fifth Amendment right to decline to speak to anybody about anything. And in the history of BEM PD since I've been here, quarter of a century, no BEM police officer ever involved in a shooting here where a life was taken has invoked his Fifth Amendment right. They've all provided statements after being able a chance to relax, get a good meal in them, get a couple good sleep cycles, then come back. Now, part of the argument you'll hear is, well, citizens don't get that. Well, that's disingenuous. That's not true. Many citizens invoke their rights at shootings or use of force situations and say, I'm not going to speak to you as a police officer. And so the citizen does get the right. And what happens in those is, if the citizen's charged, what happens is that citizen at time of trial is allowed to read all the police reports, review all the footage of videos from it. They are allowed to hear all the testimony in court. Then they're allowed to provide their story or statement, and they can build it off everything they've already heard. Whereas a police officer of BEM-PD to this day, has given a statement within 48 hours, in absence of hearing other witness statements, in absence of seeing all this. So it's disingenuous, and I think it's unfair to attack that an officer, number one, gets 48 hours to decompress, nobody else does. That's not true. Everybody gets opportunity, and it's unfair to say the officer doesn't give a statement when they do. And a lot of it's education. People don't know these things. Mm-hmm. And people quite often lose sight of the fact that a police officer is still a citizen and still has a Fifth Amendment right. Mm-hmm. So they don't have to. And again, no police officer has ever done that. Because when they come to work, they want to do the right thing and they want to help people. Mm-hmm. They don't want to shoot anybody. They don't want to use force. So they know inside them it's the right thing to do is give a statement, and they do.
You're confident that the case will be resolved and on behalf of the officers?
I can't comment on that because there's been a lawsuit filed.
Okay.
What I can tell you is those are both very exceptional officers. They have a history of good decision making, and they're good people in their heart. I know that.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman.
That's a good thing.
Appreciate it very much.